Right. Not really. Okay. Oh, still switch the race and begin again. Oh, what did you? Did you stop it and begin the recording? Huh?
Okay, good morning, ladies. As we start Shemos, this morning's learning is going to be for Refuah Shlema for Chasya Bas Cyril and Rocha Malka Bas Tirtzel Shendel. They should have a Refuah Shlema. Okay, let's begin. Shemos, page 292 in the Chumashim. Shemos, Perak Aleph, Pasuk Aleph. Let's begin the first Aliyah. Ve'ela Shemos B'nai Yisrael Habayim Mitzrayim As Yaakov Ishu Ve'Yisrael Bo. These are the names of the Bnei Yisrael who were coming to Egypt. As Yaakov with Yaakov, each man, his household, and his household came. Who were they? Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zvulun, and Binyamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, v'Asher. Vayhi kol nefesh yotzei Yerach Yaakov shivim nefesh, and all of the persons who emerged from Yaakov, meaning all of his descendants, how many were there that came with him? Shivim nefesh, 70 souls. Yosef hayab Mitzrayim, and Yosef was in Mitzrayim. Vayamas Yosef v'chol echol v'chol hador hahu. At this juncture, as we start in Shemos, it tells us Yosef had died, and all of his brothers and the entire generation. They've all passed. Uvnei Yisrael paru vayishutzu vayirbu vayatzmu b'mod ma'od vatimalei haaretz osam. We know this pasuk well. It's in the Haggadah. And what happened? The children of Israel were fruitful. They teemed. They increased. They became strong. Very, very much so, and the land became filled with them. Vayakom melech chodosh al Mitzrayim asher lo yodas Yosef, and a new king arose in Mitzrayim who didn't know Yosef. Vayomer el amo, and he said to the nation, right? He says to his people, Hinei am b'nei Yisrael rav va'atzum mimenu. Behold, the people, the children of Israel, are more numerous and stronger than we are. Hava nischak balo. Come, let us outsmart them, or let's deal with them with guile. Pen yirbeh, vayaki sikreno milchama v'nosaf gamhu asonenu v'nocham banu v'olam min haaretz. Why do we have to worry about them? He says, lest they become numerous, they become so many, and it may be that they will wage war. The Jews will wage war against us, and they may join our enemies, and they will defeat us in our own land. Vayasimo olav sarei misim lamana naso b'siv losam. So they appointed taskmasters over Bnei Yisrael in order to inflict them with burdens. Vayiven arei miskenos leFaro as Pisam ve'es Ramses, and they built storage cities for Paro, Pisam, Pitom, and Ramses. V'chasher yanu also ken yirbeh v'chen yifrotz. But as much as they would afflict the Jew, so they would increase. Ve'aputzu mipnei Bnei Yisrael, and they became disgusted because of the children of Israel. Now the Egyptians enslaved Bnei Israel with work that they define as parech. What does that mean? Crushing harshness is the translation. We're going to come back to that. And they embittered their lives with hard work. And they made their lives with hard work, with mortar and with bricks and with every labor of the field. And then it says, "As kol avodosam asher avdu bahem befarech," and all their labors that they performed with them, they were crushing harshness. They enslaved the Jews in terrible situations. Vayomer melech Mitzrayim lama yodot ha'ivriot asher shema achat shifra v'shem hasheni pua. Now the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, said to the Hebrew midwives, one was Shifra and the other was Pua. What were they instructed? Vayomer bilayadechen eso ivrios risen alavanayim im benhu v'amiten oto v'imbas hi v'choya. And he told them, he said, when you deliver the Hebrew women and you see on the birth stool that it's a boy, you kill the boy. If it's a girl, you let her live. Vatirena hamialdot es elokim v'lo asu kasher diber aleim melech Mitzrayim. But the midwives feared God, and they did not do as they were instructed, right? And they just opposite, they let all children, it didn't matter, they let all of the children live. Okay, that's what we're going to go back and study. Rav Soloveitchik looks at this entire first Aliyah as the prototype for anti-Semitism. He sees this here in these psukim, a description of anti-Semitism that still permeates to this very day. If you want to know and understand how anti-Semitism develops, you study this first Aliyah in Parsha Shemos. So let's begin. Ve'ila Shemos, the opening words. Rav Soloveitchik wonders, why is this sefer called Shemos? Is it because just the second word in Ve'ila Shemos, that's how it got its name? And the Rav said, hey, 1 second, that's not the way it works. How does it not work like that? He notes, for example, why is Bamidbar called Bamidbar? It's not called the fourth book of the Torah because of its opening word, but because the stories in Chumash Bamidbar all happened where? In the Midbar. So it's describing, oh, you're going to now study this fourth book of the fourth sefer of the Torah. It's all happening in the Midbar. That's why it's called Bamidbar. Devarim. Why is Devarim called the fifth name the name for the fifth book? Because in this sefer, everything is Devarim. What is Devarim? That's another word for mitzvot. We are studying all the mitzvot that were taught in the first four books. We're now going to explain them totally in the fifth book. That's why Devarim is alluding to mitzvot. It's not because it's the second Eled of HaDevarim. It's not because that's the opening word of the book. The book, the sefer, the Chumash Aleph, Chumash Beis, Chumash Gimel, Dalet, and Hey, don't get their names because they're the opening words. That's what the point the Rav is making. Vayikra. Why is Vayikra called Vayikra? Because Vayikra refers to HaKadosh Baruch Hu communicating with us in a very important Vayikra. He called out, he communicated with us where? In the Ohel Moed, in the Mishkan. Oh, that's when God and Moshe communicated with each other there and told us how to communicate, namely with Karbanos. That's why it's called Vayikra. In other words, the name of the Sefer alludes to, it gives you in synopsis form, the whole picture of what the book is all about. Shemos. Shemos means what? Names. What does that have to do with the price of fish in Cambodia, as they would say, right? Oh, okay. So here the Rav, remember, the Rav sees this first Aliyah as the prototype and the understanding of anti-Semitism and how it functions. Shemos represents a very important lesson in Judaism. Shemos means each person has their own name, which means the importance of the individual. The individual is crucial. So often in Judaism, we talk about the minyan, right? We need a minyan. We need the community. Community is very, very important. I'm the first person to tell you that, 100%. But within the community is comprised of individuals, and individuals are crucial. And so the Sefer is teaching you Shemos. Each individual is important. If you will, the Torah is telling us, Rav Soloveitchik says, that Exodus would have taken place even for one human being. The miracle, that's the message of the opening. Shemos. This is the name for the whole Sefer, to teach you the importance of the individual, as you're going to see in a few minutes, in the dynamic of, in the way anti-Semitism works. What do you do immediately? You eradicate the importance of the individual. That's what the Germans did. That's what Pharaoh did. That's what everybody does when you deal with anti-Semitism. When you deal with eradicating any race, what do you do? How do people kill each other? How do you get the populace to come along and kill other human beings that are walking down the street? I'm not talking about deranged people that kill, that murder. I'm talking about a whole population, a whole country, a whole world went crazy during the Holocaust. People killed other people. How do you do that? There's only one way, and that is to demonstrate to the people that the people that you're killing are not people, that the people that you are killing. So what happens? You remove their individuality. Oh, he's not a human being. She's not a human being, so you can kill them. They're lower than rodents. And that's exactly what the Germans did. And that's exactly what the Chumash is telling us Paro tries to do. Who rebels? We know. You just read it. The Mialdot Ivriyot rebel, right? They're not willing to follow this. They disagree. But that is his process. And so the Rav says Shemos is crucial. It's the allusion to the entire story of anti-Semitism, of how you eradicate a whole people. You eradicate a whole people by removing their individuality. You elevate the human being by focusing on their individuality. Let's continue. The Rav reminisced, for example, when he said the Rav went to Israel only one time. In 1935, the Rav came to America in 1931-32. He had just received his PhD from the University of Berlin, and he came. He was supposed to go to Chicago. It's a fascinating little piece of biography. He was on his way to Chicago. He was supposed to dock in New York and cross the country to Chicago. The yeshiva in Chicago was supposed to be hiring him to become Rosh Yeshiva. Oscar Fassman, Zichrono Livracha, wrote the letter informing him that, informing Ramosha, his father already had come in the 20s to Yeshiva University from Warsaw. Rav Soloveitchik's father was in Warsaw. He was taken by Rabbi Revel, who was the first president and founder of Yeshiva University. He was appointed Rosh Yeshiva in YU, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, that's the Rav's father. And the Rav's father was informed by Rabbi Fassman, tell your son he's not coming to Chicago. What's in 1931-32? What's in 32? The Depression. Everything was wiped out. Yeshiva didn't have money. The Chicago Yeshiva had no money to bring anybody on as a new hire. And so they informed him no. So now Reb Moshe had to find with, by the way, it's his son coming with his wife and a baby. And what are you doing with my son? And that's when the Rav's father found him the position in Boston. And he said, you're going to go to Boston. That's how he got to Boston. That's how the Rav ended up becoming the Rav Harashi, if you will, the Rav Ha'ir of Boston. That's exactly the position that he gets. So that's in 1932. So in 1935, the chief rabbinate of Tel Aviv opens. Chief rabbinate in Tel Aviv opens. So Rabbi Soloveitchik's father says to his son, apply for it. You should get it. Apply for it. He was a young man. He was in his young 30s. He was the youngest of all the three candidates. So Rav Amiel was the Rav in Antwerp, and he was the candidate. Rav Herzig was a candidate. They had over 40 candidates. It's a whole different story in its own right, but they narrowed it down to three candidates. Rav Amiel, who was chief rabbi of the Mizrahi community in Antwerp, Rav Herzig, who was living at that time in London, in England, and Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik was the youngest. But Rav Soloveitchik was at that juncture in his life an agudist. Who was in charge of the elections? It's just a side, interesting little piece of Jewish history that I'm sharing with you. Who was in charge of the elections? It was Mayor Bar Ilan, Mayor Berlin. He was the head of the Mizrahi, and he was in charge of the elections. He was going to decide who was the next chief rabbi. It didn't matter that you had a vote and a committee voting. It was Mayor Bar Ilan who was going to decide. He was related to Rav Soloveitchik. This was a direct relationship. The Berlins and the Soloveitchiks were related. But Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, the Rav, was an agudist at the time. So the story goes that Mayor Bar Ilan said the following about the three candidates. Remember, they were all Gedolim, Rav Amiel and Rav Soloveitchik and Rav Herzig. He said, the greatest Gaon of the three, Rabbi Soloveitchik. He's the genius of the three. He says, the greatest tzaddik of the three, Rav Herzig. The next chief rabbi, Rav Amiel. Amiel, please appreciate, he did become the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. Usually it was a stepping stone. You became chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, you became chief rabbi of Israel. That's how it worked. But anyhow, so Rav Rav Soloveitchik goes, that's why I'm telling you all of this. Rav Soloveitchik goes to Eretz Israel only one time in his life. And it's the Shavuos of 1935, because that's when the elections are taking place during that time. So he goes for a number of weeks. You don't take that trip across the ocean on a boat just for, a day or two. He went for a number of weeks. He gave shiurim across the country. He was giving drushas across the country. People came running to hear him. They said, Reb Chaim Brisker's anacle, Reb Chaim Brisker's grandson, is coming to give the great drushos. And example, in Petach Tikva, in the Beit Knesset Hagadol in Petach Tikva, he gave a very famous shir. The story goes, the Rav told it to us. The story goes that he came in, the place was packed, wall to wall. There was only stand. Before he started, everybody came to hear Rabbi Soloveitchik. The grandson of Reb Chaim Brisker is coming to speak. And they said, if you want to hear Reb Chaim Brisker, listen to the son, to the grandson. He walks in, he's ready to start his drasha, and somebody from the back, before he opens his mouth, says, but there's a Rambam that disagrees with you. Before he even began, there's a Rambam that disagrees with you. So that was the story. He went to Merkas Rav Kook to give Rav Charlap, Zichron Livracha. Rav Kook was still alive. Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook was still alive, but he was very sick. It's 1935, and Rav Kook is going to die, Gimel Elul, 1935. This is Shavuos, a few months before Rav Kook dies. Rav Kook says to Rav Charlap, you go introduce Rav, I can't get out of bed. He was in bed. He was dying. He says, you go introduce Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, and you tell everybody, just listen carefully. They'll hear Reb Chaim Brisker. They'll hear Reb Chaim Brisker. And everybody came to Merkas Harav to hear the Rav give his drasha. He went across the country. This is what the Rav reminisces. He went to a non-religious kibbutz. Now you'll see why I'm telling you the whole story. He went to the non-religious kibbutz. And the non-religious guide at the kibbutz says, our behemoths, our animals, we've given names to our animals. Each cow has a name. So he points to this cow, and the Rav said, he told him, this is Rochel. And the Rav gave a look on his face. He was very upset. And the non-religious guide said to him, oh, you rabbis, is this another restriction you have? Meaning this was a non-religious kibbutznik. They were against anything Jewish. So they said, in other words, sarcastically said, you rabbis only know how to say no. You prohibit everything. And so you don't let us name our animals. This is what the Rav says. He says, he didn't understand my reaction. He was arguing the rabbis have no rhyme or reason why they say no. Here's what the Rav said. He says, he didn't understand that a name represents human individuality. This is something that's exclusive to humanity. That is why we have the laws of Avelut for every human being, not for animals. Animals, you don't have any Avelut. For a human being, no human being can be replaced. And this is what the Rav writes. A dog may exhibit great friendship to its master, but a different dog can be substituted, which could display the identical friendship. A dog fundamentally has no name. It is merely part of the species. As devoted as the dog may be, there can be no avelut for a dog. For a human being, each individual is holy as an individual. And that is why he goes on, the Rav said, he says, that's why the halacha is so concerned, and we're very strict when we write a ksuba. I'm going to be going to do 3 weddings in the next 2 weeks in New York. Each one, I check the ksuba over and over and over again, and I bring a spare ksuba. Why? That we maybe find a mistake right before we write the ksuba. Why are we so strict about the names, how we spell the name of the chassan and the kala and their fathers? Why are we so exact? Why such exact precision? Because the correct spelling represents individuality. The reason is because of the utmost importance that halacha gives to the person. This very idea, he says, is highlighted in Chumash Bereshis. Who gets changed of name in Chumash Bereshis? 3 people: Avraham, Sarah, and Yaakov. Why these changes of name? Because their individuality changes. They're transformed from Avram to Avraham, from Sarai to Sarah, from Yaakov to Yisrael. And each name represents the unique transformation of the individual. With their name change, their individuality changes. Shemos is not by accident. It gives you the total understanding of Jewish appreciation for the individual. Now we can appreciate why this sefer is called Shemos. It's an allusion to the world difference between how we approach and how the Gentile who wants to eradicate us approaches. We see the value in each individual. If you are interested in eradicating a people, what do? You remove their individuality. And that's why the Elek Shemos, right away, that's the opening. That's already the most important allusion to understanding what's going to happen in this Aliyah. Continue on. In that very opening sentence, the Rav says, here you have the dynamic of anti-Semitism. The Eila Shemos, okay, individuality. What's the next words? Haba'im mitzrayma. Haba'im. What does haba'im mean? He translates it perfectly. Who were coming? Who were coming? We came. It should have been asher ba'u in the past tense. Haba'im means the present. They're coming. We're coming to Egypt. We came 210 years before. What are you talking about? We're coming. Who are coming to Egypt? So the Rav explains. In this choice of present tense, the Rav develops the dynamic in anti-Semitism. We arrived in Egypt 210 years earlier, but by using the present, the Torah is giving you the thinking of the Egyptians vis-a-vis what they thought of us. In their eyes, we were just arriving. We were totally strangers and we were totally foreigners in their land. We were immigrants. We weren't immigrants. We were there 210 years. How long does it take to become a citizen? How many years? We should have been asher ba'u. In their eyes, we were never citizens. We never are able to be accepted by the Egyptians as part of their land. In the words of the Rav, the belief of otherness of the Jew repeats itself through history. Listen to those words. The belief of otherness. Otherness means you're not accepted. You're the foreigner. You're always the foreigner. Jews lived in Germany even before the Dark Ages. During the Middle Ages, the Rav writes, the Jews supported Germany from within. They were an integral part of society. For centuries, we know that. You know, survivors from Germany will tell you, survivors from the Holocaust will tell you, my family lived in this Bavarian this Bavarian hamlet for hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. We were part of the community. Comes along, the Rav writes, yet many centuries after they arrived, these Jews were wiped out in the Holocaust. They were charged by Hitler with being strangers. They were not counted among society. We were outsiders. Asher haba'im mitzrayma is the first and most important element in anti-Semitism. You make the other an other. He's not one of us. He's not one of us. He's not a German. He's an outsider. He's a foreigner. If he's an immigrant, you can treat him differently than everyone else. There is a second implication of haba'im mitzrayma, that of the present tense, that is just the opposite of what I just told you. I just told you haba'im mitzrayma teaches us the dynamic of anti-Semitism, right? And it's negative, it has a negative connotation. Haba'im mitzrayma. In other words, you're being given the thinking of the Egyptian vis-a-vis the Jew. The Rav, however, suggests haba'im mitzrayma is not only giving you the thinking of them towards us, but our thinking. What makes us tick? What makes the Jew tick? And the Rav quotes the famous Medrash famous Medrash is two different versions of the Medrash. The Rav is quoting one of the versions where it says there were four. You've heard three. I'm positive better known as three because three is easier to remember. But four, the Medrash says there were four reasons that we merited Yitzias Mitzrayim. One was we never changed our names. Remained, as it says, the Medrash says, Ruvain went down Ruvain left Ruvain. Right? He kept his Jewish names. Number two, we kept our language, meaning we spoke. And by the way, that very theory played a very important role in the European Jewish Haredi community. What did they speak when they came to America? And what do they speak to this very day? And tells, I grew up in Cleveland, and tells the Shiurim, Rav Gifter was an American born. He was born in Virginia, Rabbi Gifter. He went to Yitzchak Elchanan first. Then he went off to Telz right before the war. He went off to Telz. He came back to America before the war broke out. And then he became Rosh Yeshiva in Telz. You know what language he gave his shir in? Yiddish. An American born, he gave his shir in Yiddish. The yeshiva was speaking Yiddish. The American community was speaking Yiddish. The truth is, Rav Soloveitchik gave his Gemara shir until the late 1950s in Yiddish. He stopped giving it in Yiddish when he realized the boys didn't understand him. And he said, well, this is crazy. And the Rav, who came over to America not knowing English, mastered a Cambridge, Oxford, English. That was the brilliance of Rav Soloveitchik. But the Rav, and by the way, you hear these shirim now on YouTube, they come up with them, and they give you subtitles in English, but you hear the Rav speaking in Yiddish, you hear, this constantly.
But Yiddish is not our language, Hebrew is our language.
But this was the Yiddish, I never forget, and I heard it in the Piv, and the Rav said, I don't know, he said, I don't know if Yiddish is Lashon HaKodesh, but it was the Lashon of the Kedoshim. It's beautiful. Because I don't know if it's Lashon HaKodesh. And that's what he said, meaning kibbutzing it, sarcastic. It's not Lashon HaKodesh. But it was the Lashon of the Kedoshim. And the Rav spoke a beautiful Yiddish. And you listen, you've heard with me, we've listened to these, they're producing them constantly now. And they do subtitles. I listen to I don't know Yiddish, but I listen to the dramatic delivery of Rav Soloveitchik in the Yiddish. And then I look at the subtitles and I'm just mesmerized by hearing his voice. But anyhow.
But what you're saying is they didn't make us other, we made ourselves other.
Yeah, that's correct. That's the second interpretation. Exactly. One is that they looked at us as the other. The second is that's correct. Exactly what Ruchama is pointing out. We made ourselves other. Let me continue. So the Medrash says, we never changed our names. We never changed our language. We kept our unique clothing. Tzitzis, I assume that meant. And we kept our God. That's the Medrash. We kept our God. We worshiped our God. In other words, the Medrash is teaching us that the Jew never forfeits his identity. He protects his identity. Haboyim, we're still coming. We're still who we are. And the Rav goes on and he says, Paro accused us of not being loyal citizens. He was wrong. He misunderstood us. He said, we are very loyal. I remember a Rebbe I had in high school in Chumash. He said these words. He said, the Jew was more German than the German. He was more American than the American. We're so loyal, it's unbelievable. We become more than everyone else. However, as the Rav said, he says, Paro was wrong. He said, we weren't loyal. We were very loyal. But at the same time, if you push the Jew against the wall and say, abandon your Jewish identity, then we reject the invitation. Then we fight back. So Haboim has both meanings. It's giving you the thinking of the Egyptian, of Pharaoh and the Egyptians, and it's giving you also at the same time the Jew in his reaction. Has both lessons. Continue on. So it says, these are the names that come. Now, take a look at Pasuk Ches. This is the important Pasuk. Yakom melech chodosh al Mitzrayim asher lo yodas Yosef. And now suddenly, a new king A new Pharaoh comes to power in Mitzrayim. The famous 5 words, Asher lo yada es Yosef. What does that mean? A new king arose and he didn't know who Yosef was. This new, the two pshatim, it may very well have been the old Pharaoh who forgot, or no, it most probably doesn't make sense that it's the old Pharaoh, would be what he's very, very old, but that's one pshat. But no, the pshat is a new Pharaoh arises, right? A new Pharaoh becomes the king. What does it mean? Asher lo yodas Yosef. He has no interest to remember Yosef. It's against his interest to remember Yosef. He doesn't want to remember how Yosef saved the country. The original Pharaoh had invited Yosef and encouraged Yosef to bring his family down. Why did he encourage Yosef to bring his family? He gave it, and he sent. What did Pharaoh send? Chariots. You know what chariots were in those times, in ancient times? Only Egypt had chariots. It was the nuclear warfare of the time. It was the ultimate secret armament that only the government of Egypt had. Nobody else had agalot like that. Chariots to fight in war. This was the ultimate weapon that only the Egyptians had. Remember, the Egyptians were the most advanced technological society of its time. The Egyptians were the masters of science and of math of its time. The Egyptians were the most cultured, quote unquote. So was Germany, correct? So was Germany. Now, Pharaoh invites Yosef's family. You bring them down. It's my invitation. Agalot, I'm sending the agalot. I'm sending the wagons. I'm sending the chariots. Not little one. I'm saying chariots to bring your whole family down. Why? Because Pharaoh was very impressed with Yosef. Yosef was a genius. He proved himself to be a genius, correct? So you scratch your head and you say, if Yosef is a genius, and he tells me he has 11 brothers, and he has a father, there's a lot more good brains in that family. It must probably is part of their DNA. And so Pharaoh says, bring them down. Who's going to benefit? The country will benefit. Egypt will benefit by having more Jews around. As long as the Jew was allowed to prosper, the land prospers. We know this. We know the history. The moment the new Pharaoh intentionally forgets this fact is the moment the country begins its decline. Did this repeat in history? Sure. Spain, Portugal, Germany. Germany is not the Germany of pre-war. We all know that, 100%. As long as you keep the Jew there and the Jew prospers, Asher lo yodas Yosef, that begins the anti-Semitism in the streets, no question about it. But it also begins the decline of the country. Let's continue on. Pasuk Yud Gimel. So he tells them Hava nischak malo, we're going to use guile to destroy the Jewish people. So then it says, Vaya'avidu Mitzrayim es bnei Yisrael b'farach, and he makes their lives miserable. He gives them harsh kind of work. What do you mean harsh kind of work? The enslavement of the Jewish people had 3 stages. Number 1, the first is the demonization of the Jew. We saw this. Haboim, they're foreigners. They're not part of us. What do you mean they're foreigners? What does that mean? Here, you're the Pharaoh. What are you telling your people? They're a 5th column. They're spies. That's what you're telling them. A spy threatens the safety of the country from within. We got to find out who are our spies. If they're not part of us, they don't share our destiny, then what are they doing? They're spies. That's number 1. Number 2, the second stage was to enlist the Jewish people into the national service to build massive storage cities. This was done with the premise that by participating, we could demonstrate who's loyal and who's not loyal. If you reject the campaign to pay taxes, If you reject the campaign to build the country, then you're not part of the country. Oh, so we'll check him out, Pharaoh has. He's going to advance the country, right? By an advancement. And the third stage was to relegate men to work in areas where beforech, as Chazal say, where women. Let's switch. Men will get women's jobs, women will get men's jobs. Oh, but that's not the way people act. There are areas that men do better than women, and women, I know this is not PC anymore, but it's true. Anybody who realizes this, there are areas where men and women are not built the same, right? God did not make my mother always said, everybody's equal, just some are a little more equal than others, right? What's her expression? Yeah, animal farm, exactly. It says befarech is exactly that. We're going to make the areas where women usually worked, now they're going to give it to men. Where men usually work, why do you do that? Why do you do that? It demoralizes the people. If I can't succeed in what I'm doing, I'm demoralized. And that's the clue to understanding exactly what Paro is doing. You demoralize, and why is he doing that? Again, remember, why is he doing that? Who does he have to? He has this image. He's creating this image in his palace, right? That I'm going to destroy a whole people. I'm going to destroy a whole people. How do I destroy a whole people? What? I just go out with my army? You can't do that. By the way, if you ever study your history, you'll understand this. When does Hitler rise to power? What date? January 30th, 1933. When does the Holocaust really start? Meaning the mass destruction of the Jewish people. 10 years later. It's less than 10 years later. It's 8 years later. It's 1940, 41. 41, you start having mass murder of the Jews. Up until then, you don't have that mass murder that we know of. Of the 6 million, the main 6 million happens between 40 and 45. 40, 41, and 45. With the mass murder, having death camps. Treblinka was the first mass death camp that we had. Chelbeno, Sobibor, Treblinka. The Chelbeno and Sobibor predated Treblinka. Chelbeno and Sobibor. Chelbeno had, I think, 180,000 Jews died. In Sobibor, 300,000 Jews died. All of, quote unquote, the mistakes of running a death camp, they learned from Chelbeno and Sobibor, and they mastered it in Treblinka. How many Jews died in Treblinka, and how long? Do you know how long Treblinka was in existence? 16 months. 16 months. That's more than enough. Don't get me wrong. But 16 months. Do you know how many died? Well, there's an argument among the historians. Was it 800,000 Jews in 16 months? Or was it 1 million Jews in 16 months? 1/6 of the population that were murdered got murdered in Treblinka. Your life expectancy in Treblinka, do you know how long it was? From the time the train dropped you off to the time you were murdered and gassed and then burnt was how long? 2 hours maximum. 2 hours maximum. How many survivors from Treblinka? Do you know this? There were 40. 40 escaped Treblinka. Only 40 escaped Treblinka. That's it. There were uprisings in Treblinka. Only 40 escaped Treblinka. The Jews were taken by the Nazis to be the ones that guided the Jews into the quote unquote showers, into the gas, right? Those lived for 1 month and then they were killed. They were killed. It was an unbelievable factory of death. How do you do that? How do you take this mass idea and get the people in the street to buy into it? You're asking them to kill their neighbors. You're asking them to kill the people that they've lent sugar and milk and flour to and have borrowed and had nice relationships, have done business. How do you do that? Well, the Paro's doing this too, right here. Hava nischak malo. It doesn't happen overnight. It didn't happen in 1933, January 1st. It was built up and built up and built up. And first, when did the Nuremberg laws go into practice, into rule? 1935. Between 33 and 35, slowly, you do things. You slowly do things. You slowly make the Jew the outsider. Haboyim Mitzrayim. They just coming. They're foreigners. They're spies. They're not to be allowed into your restaurants. We're not to shop in their stores. These are quote unquote, in the bigger picture, we know, are the innocent acts. They're not innocent, don't get me wrong, but they're the innocent. That slowly but surely, but if you do that slowly but surely, and add to it, what happens? You're able to destroy a people. Slowly, you're demoralizing the Jew, you're changing their perspective. Oh, the men are doing women. It does two things. It demoralizes the person who has to do it. And what else does it do? To the people who have to implement it, meaning the Egyptians or the Germans, it makes the people they're doing it to less human. Continue on in Pasuk Yudalid. Vayimaru es chayem ba'avoda kasha v'chomer u'b'veinim u'v'chol avoda b'asodeh. And they made their lives miserable, the Torah tells us. And they did b'chol avoda b'asodeh, and they made them do work in the fields. Why are we being told they made them do work in the fields? Because the Jew was distinct. What was the Jew? The Jew had a unique personality. What was he? He was a shepherd. He wasn't a farmer. If you take his profession away from him and say, no, you can't be that. No, you're no longer who you think you are. You change the perspective of everybody towards them. Oh, even the economic function is now changed. These are all parts of a bigger plan. Demoralize and make them non-human. That's what the Rav understands. We're being told that the Egyptians tried to change the economic structure. It was all part of one word. Go back to Pasuk Yud. Hava nischak malo. What's hava nischak malo? We're going to use our chachma to how we're going to destroy them. How are we going to destroy them? Hitler does the same thing, right? And then eventually it leads to the extinction of the Jewish race, the final solution, right? The final solution. And they meet in what's the name of the place in Berlin, right outside Berlin. I've been there, and then it's now a museum where you can see where they sat around the table. Yemach Shemam v'Zichram. Wannsee, right? Wannsee. Yeah, I think it's Wannsee. There you can see it all led to that. Okay, now we have a solution, but it didn't happen in 33. It happens in 40. That's when it happens. It takes 7 years of constant hava nischak malo. Continue on to Pasuk Tezayin. So then he says, now what he tells, and this is, you'll see the brilliance of understanding how to read these psukim through the eyes of Rav Soloveitchik. He understands this is the prototype of anti-Semitism. Here, Tezayin. Take a look at, or Tesvav. Let's start with Tesvav. Yomer Melech Mitzrayim Lam Yadol Ta'ivriyot. Who does he turn to? Who does Paro turn to? The midwives. Simple shot is they are Jewish, not the midwives of the Jews, but the Jewish midwives. There's two ways to read this. Were they Jewish? That's the question. Were they Jewish or were they non-Jewish? It seems simple shot is they were Jewish. He turns to the Jewish midwives. And we know the Medrash. Rashi quotes there are Miriam and Yocheved, right? Miriam and Yocheved, different names for them. These are the nicknames. Fine. Vayomer. And what does he tell them? What does Paro tell the Jewish midwives? Bialchen et ha'ivriot. What does he tell them? We want you to kill the male offspring of the Jews. question, ladies? What's the question? Forget about that for 2 seconds. We want you to start murdering. Why? So the Medrash gives us an answer. He has a master plan. We're not destroying everybody right away. That's the Medrash. The Medrash says they were afraid that the Savior is coming. But whatever I think simple, realistic, rationalistic, a rational reason, can't destroy everybody right away. We'll start with this part of the population.
You start with the girls before you start with because
no, very good. But who's the danger?
The physical strength.
I'll give you an example. Of course. When the Germans came in, her Zaidi Zichrono Livracha, was a good example of this. When the Germans marched into a town, who did they go after first? The leaders. The Gestapo had a list of the leaders. Why do you have to destroy the leaders first? Round them up, and then, well, if you don't have anybody leading an opposition, we'll have it much easier. They had it all on Yitzchak Malo. They went into, and why I tell you about Zaidi? Zaidi was in Antwerp at the time. He had left Berlin in 1933. He had left Berlin, and he went to Antwerp. He was a leader in the Mizrahi, Apollo Mizrahi. He was the president of the community at the time. And the Gestapo had his name on the list. And they went looking for him. Right away, they walk into a city. They don't waste any time. Let's get rid of the leaders. Let's get rid of the men. So if you translate it as let's get rid of the leaders. Women were not the leaders at that time. Well, you can say Miriam is, but Miriam is unique in that sense. But we're going to go after the leaders, okay? But ask me another question. Read these words again. In benhu v'hamiten oto v'imbati v'choya. What are you asking? Kill. Who's doing the killing?
The midwives?
Thank you very much. And who are they?
Jewish.
Now I have to ask you a question. If you want to make sure that 100% of these boys are killed, wouldn't it be better to put in Egyptians to do it than Jews? Jews are going to revolt. The chance of revolution, the chance of a revolt is much higher having the Jews than having non-Jews. If you really are interested in getting rid of the Jews and having this sealed tightly and working perfectly and efficient, quote unquote, efficient, who would you do? You wouldn't do this. Comes along the fellow and he says, go back to the words. Excuse me. The Germans. Who took care of the bunks?
Jewish couples.
Thank you very much. That is exactly correct. The Jewish couples. I just read a book. It was a biography. I read it in 2 hours. We have it in the house. We bought it a few weeks ago. I can't remember the name. This fellow who survived. I heard about it through Y.Y. Jacobson. So I went and he mentioned it. So I went, he said, it's a very good book. It's a fellow who lives to 100 and 102 he was a survivor. And he recounts, why am I telling you this? He recounts, he was a survivor of the Holocaust, and Baruch Hashem, I think it's called the happiest man in the world, because he survives and then he doesn't look back. His whole shita is to look forward. So he turns his life into, he says, I could have been negative or I could be positive. The only way I'm going to survive is if I'm going to be positive. And he builds a beautiful family and he builds a beautiful career. And this is his shita. But the beginning of the book, which is the story, is he goes back to Brussels. He's from Brussels. And he goes back to Brussels and he sees one of the capos walking on the street. And he wants to kill him. He wants to kill him. Wants to take revenge against him. And he calls over the police and he says, arrest that man. He wasn't arrested. Why? Because by the time he sees him, the capo has married into an important political family. But he was a capo, and the capo knew that his life was in danger. And so the capo walked around. He says this in the book. Capo walked around with security guards because he was afraid. The capos were the worst. That's what he's doing here. That's what Paro is doing here. He says, if I can get the mothers, the women, to kill babies, then it's demonstrating that this whole species called the Jews are subhuman. They have no feelings. They have no feelings. A mother won't kill a baby. That's not the way it works. A mother would show kindness, right? But that's why he says, if the Jew kills his own, this demonstrates that they have no right. Paro's message is they have no right to live like humans. And like I said, this approach was mastered by the Germans. Everything they did was to dehumanize us. They shipped us to the concentration camps in cattle cars. Why cattle cars? They're not human beings. When you arrive, your individuality, the Elet Shemos, is taken away from you. You're given a number. You're no longer given a name. Name is individuality. All of this was to make us subhuman. What's his name from the expert on Holocaust history here? He's spoken numerous times. He lives here in LA. He ran Spielberg Institute. What's his name? You know what I'm talking about. I can't remember his name. With a B, isn't it? With a B? What's his? No, I'm talking about Professor. Teaches anyhow. He pointed out in one of his articles was that he was the first director of Spielberg's Institute of Birnbaum. Thank you. You should know that name.
I was going to say.
You should know that name. Birnbaum. You should.
No, I knew it, but I was waiting.
Yeah. No, Birnbaum. So Professor Birnbaum writes an article. He says, do you know part of the architecture of Auschwitz was built to dehumanize the Jew? The bathrooms. And you have a lot of people needing the bathroom. The bathrooms only had one door. Why do you have one door? He demonstrates this. Why do you have one door? You need two doors with such a population. You need one coming in and one going out. But if everybody gets bottlenecked in the front, well, they don't even deserve to do what a human being has to basically do with their own body. That was all. He has his whole theory. He says, not his whole theory. He says he found documentation that when they were building the concentration camps, they were building with Havanis Hakmalo. This was all part of the terrible approach to dehumanizing the Jew. All this was to make the Jew subhuman, as Birnbaum writes. They made us even less than the rodents. If we're less than the rodents, then you're not killing human beings. If you're not killing human beings, then you can push people into gas chambers and wipe them out because they're less than rodents. The Rav recounted the following story. I never heard this until I saw this in the Rav, but I'm positive the Rav could have documented, obviously, had his documentation and had his source for it. But just listen to this. I never heard this. Maybe you have heard this. During the Holocaust, I'm quoting the Rav, the Nazis forcibly took Jews to an elegant hotel in Warsaw, had them dress in festive clothing, loaded the tables with delicacies, hired an orchestra, and forced the Jews to dance. All the while, a Nazi photographer took photos of them. Afterward, they were immediately sent to the death camps. After the war, it was discovered that why did the Nazis do this? The Nazis had planned to disseminate these pictures to demonstrate how Jews callously ignored the suffering of their brothers, even celebrating while their co-religionists were being slaughtered. This is, you can kill, the Jewish mother can kill the Jewish child. Oh, if the Jewish mother can kill the Jewish child, then the Jewish child doesn't deserve to live. When we can certainly do it. Hava Nishak. What these opening psukim, and now to wrap it all up, and it's just one aliyah, most important aliyah. What these opening psukim demonstrate is the plan that Paro uses to show the world that they would be better off without the Jew. That is what he's doing. He's trying to demonstrate to his people we'd be better off. Once he could achieve this, he could enlist his people to kill us. You can eliminate the Jew if you can slowly, it takes stages, it takes steps. It goes, like I keep on repeating, 33 to 40, and slowly intervals in the middle. 35, the Nuremberg laws, Kristallnacht, 38. All of these things happen slowly but surely, all to change the psyche of the regular person in the street. Because how do you go around and kill your neighbor? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't. We're not wired to kill each other. That's not the way we're made. So how do you do that? You do that if you can demonstrate that the person you're killing is not a person, is not a human. They would have no objections, no ethical hesitancy, because they were killing non-humans. And that's the way the Rav understands this first Aliyah. It's all a prototype to appreciating anti-Semitism. And then now take this, by the way, remember this and share this at your Seder, because these are the psukim, right, that we deal with in the Seder. The Avodas Perach. What's Avodas Perach? Avodas Perach is all part of this crumb. How do you explain? What do you say? There's words that you can't. It's not crazy. It's crooked. It's crooked. That's right. It's crooked ethical thinking. There is no ethics to it. You become your own ethical thinker, that you have a right to do this. But that's what Hitler wanted to do. That's what Paro wanted to do. And they achieve it. We don't think of this, but that's exactly what happens in Pharaoh, in Mitzrayim. It's in early Germany. It is in early Germany. Nothing happens like Germany. We should appreciate the Holocaust is unique in its magnitude and how we were killed. But this is the beginning of it. If you want to understand how Germany does what Germany does, here you see it right there in black and white. Okay, let me give a few commercials. For the next few weeks, I'm out of town. Baruch Hashem, at 4 weddings in 2 weeks. Bezrat Hashem. So I'll be out of town. So the next 2 weeks, the next 2 parshiot, we will not have shir. And then I'll announce, of course, I'll make sure that you're aware when we're resuming. Okay?
Question.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with shir. Do you know of a Rabbi Evan Hoffman?
No.
YUTorah.org. He's a historian, brilliant. He's got a whole series of lectures on anti-Semitism.
Okay.
Phenomenal,
Okay.
phenomenal. So